Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we're going to take a look at the astrology of February. So, I have a short list of transits this month because things are pretty concentrated, and I'm also trying to pare it down a little bit to make it manageable. I'm still in the midst of finishing up Kickstarter recordings. What I've done is tried to shrink it just a little bit to make it just a little bit more manageable for me to talk about. Um, Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the real-time clock on the screen. Happy Friday, everybody, by the way. I hope that you're having a nice week and that the full moon treated you well yesterday. All right, you should be able to see the real-time clock on the screen now. And we're going to go through things sort of one by one. One of the big events of this month comes toward the very beginning when Venus enters the sign of Aquarius. Now, just as Venus does this, Venus is coming under the beams of the sun. That happens when Venus starts to move within about 15 degrees of the sun. That's the average space within which a planet disappears from view in the sky because the sun's light is such that it will drown it out if it's that close in zodiacal longitude. So you get that Venus within about 15 degrees and it disappears. This means that Venus is entering back into a transformative phase and will be eventually emerging again as the evening star after having been the morning star for quite a while. Now, as this is happening, we are going to see Venus immediately engage in something that could technically be called a translation of light, which means that Venus is going to move and get into a conjunction with Saturn and then move straight into the square with Uranus. Now, the problem is that Uranus is really not visible to the naked eye, so I'm kind of torn as to whether or not you consider this a real translation of light or not. I don't think it matters too much. The concept is what's important. And that is that Venus will hit Saturn and then go right to Uranus. Let's look at when this happens because this is the event of the early part of the month that I have my eye on. So you're going to see as this is happening, of course, Venus is getting closer to the sun. Now, when that happens, Venus is losing its power. Venus is, in a sense, dying and going through a rebirth, of course, when Venus will emerge again as the evening star. So the goddess goes through these different phases, and they're all beautiful. They all have something to share with us. As this is happening, Venus will go through the conjunction with Saturn. So here you can see the conjunction to Saturn forming between the 5th. You can see right here on February 5th that Venus gets into the conjunction with Saturn. If we go forward a day into the 6th, it'll have passed over, and immediately on the 6th is now going into the square with Uranus and Taurus at 6 degrees. Now, Uranus is in Venus's sign, so if you use the classical logic, this means that there is reception between the two planets. And my phone is buzzing, so I'm going to turn this thing off. All right. So because Uranus is in Taurus, Venus's sign, there's some connection here that is not. There's some. What do you want to say? You can consider it to be a beneficial condition when Uranus in Taurus or any planet in Taurus is connecting with Venus because that's the host of that temple of the bull. So it's not like this is the absolute worst thing in the world because there is reception between Venus and Aquarius and the planets in Taurus right now. But at any rate, that's the big moment at the beginning of the month. So what does it mean that Venus will conjoin Saturn and square Uranus? Well, part of it is a preview for what's coming later in the month around the 17th, which I'll be talking about in a minute, when Saturn squares Uranus. So that's why it's called a translation of light, because Venus is essentially bringing the energy of Saturn together with the energy of Uranus and tying them together in a kind of Venusian way. But a square, of course, doing it through a square, which is of the nature of Mars, means that Venus is going to try to soothe and harmonize some of the rougher edges of this Saturn-Uranus dynamic. And it can be a very volatile dynamic. So early in the month, what are some of the things that I see? I'm just going to write down before I break it up chop it up into individual little parts. I want to talk about the general things that you can see. Venus between, let's say, the 6th and 7th, or let's just make it a little broad and let's say February 5th to 7th. We'll try to harmonize the tension between the conservative element of Saturn and the revolutionary element of Uranus. So that's the simplest way of understanding Saturn and Uranus. Saturn is a bit more of the planet that is going to be limiting, confining, restricting, grounding, restraining. It's more serious and mature, focused and disciplined. It does a little bit better with structure and tradition. Not that Saturn can't. Saturn is a planet associated with outsiders, outcasts, things that are falling apart, degenerating, decay, liminal spaces, even mystical spaces. But Saturn can also be the kind of curmudgeonly, defiant, resistant to change type of planet. So Venus is going to try to bring Saturn together with revolutionary, rebellious, innovative, sudden, disruptive, eccentric Uranus. So watch for some attempt to harmonize. I would call it a conservative versus a kind of revolutionary impulse that's at play, and that those two impulses are conflicting with one another, but Venus is sort of trying to bring them together. I would think about it like this, and you could just use this as like an analogy. Let's say that, let's say one of your kids, of course, my kids always come to mind, Let's say your kids are like, hey, I've got this great idea. And you listen to it and you're like, hey, that's a really good idea. Like the other night, my daughter, we got this little puppet show thing for Christmas. So it's like a little theater fake stage thing. There's a little curtain and you can duck behind it and then hold up these, little puppets and make your own puppet show. And, my daughter got this great idea, 10 minutes before bedtime that we have like, that we have like an Academy Award production downstairs. And she had all these ideas. And I was like, that is so great. And it's bedtime. There's Saturn, right? So Uranus is like, I've got this groundbreaking, exciting thing that we should do. And Saturn's like, I'm sorry, we've already started your bath water. Forget about it. And then, of course, it's likely that the bath time is going to turn into a total terrorist attack, children holding parents hostage, making demands, ransoms being offered. So like that's kind of the dynamic in general going on between Saturn and Uranus this month. And Venus is trying to sort it out, and I can just hear my wife being like, well, okay, like we still have 15 minutes before we're really supposed to start bath time. So maybe we could go down and just play for a minute. And I'm over here like Saturn being like, no. Because when we go down there, if we start and then we try to stop it, they will kill us. They will mutiny and they will kill us. So you're feeding into them. It's a trap, So at any rate, Venus will be trying to smooth things over between Saturn and Uranus, between the more conservative, confining, defining, restrictive, mature, serious, sober dimension, and between the revolutionary impulse that's more impatient, but also more original and likes freedom, not constraint. How is Venus going to work that out? Well, Venus is the agent of harmonization. So you can just think about it broadly that you're trying to harmonize these elements in the early part of the month. And that could be in terms of your work, the duties and obligations and responsibilities versus the innovations and new ideas. You could be looking at this in relationships. Oh, we've always done it this way before. Can't we do something new? Yeah, but that might be risky, so those kinds of voices back and forth. Now, that's just sort of the general level. Now let's break it down a little bit more individually. What do Venus and Saturn bring together when they get together just alone? Let's just kind of put them in a vacuum. Well, you have beauty and time. I always like to use the example of a bottle of wine that can't be what it is without, 100 years under its belt of aging. The late life beauty, the beauty that, the love that you find later in life, um, when there's not, unfortunately, maybe sometimes not a lot of time left to enjoy it. So there's a bittersweetness to Venus and Saturn. There's melancholic beauty. There is a bit like Venus and Pluto in that regard, where there's kind of a subterranean, darker, more somber reverie state with Venus and Saturn. I'm always like, when I see Venus and Saturn, you always think of like, black and white photography, just that kind of, I often see Librans embodying the Venusian Saturn, because that's where Venus rules and where Saturn is exalted. So you think about Librans and the kind of dark, balanced, symmetrical quality that sometimes you'll see in the beauty of Librans. So Venus and Saturn brings that kind of energy, but Venus and Saturn can also mean heartache, hard lessons, sobering, painful heaviness around love and relationships. So there can also be sometimes the need for relations or for diplomacy to deepen an existing commitment or agreement. Venus Saturn can be like the vows of marriage. It's a vow, that's Saturn, but it's for love. That's Venus. So you think of the vow or the commitment that deepens, that restrains as it deepens. There's one of the things that we don't always appreciate. I talked to so many people over the years, and there's a lot of, there's so much divorce. It's like everyone goes through divorce. Like every client I talk to has had at least, 2 marriages or something. It's so common, right? And I'm not at all looking down on it, because my wife and I talk about all the time, like you're working on your marriage is like, daily work, and you just got to stick with it and hope you can both, ride it out together. And we've been doing okay so far, but you never know. So I'm not looking down my nose at it at all, but there's a lot of divorce. And part of what I've observed about it in myself and in my clients over the years is that we have a hard time imagining the constraint and limitation and the confinement and the heaviness and the boredom and the mundane qualities of commitment, that we have a hard time imagining that if you stick with them and if you try to relish the pain involved in love and loving someone, whether it's a marriage partner or anyone, for a long period of time, that something starts to grow through the concrete, and it does. There's flowers that come up through the concrete. Saturn and Venus are partners in the sign of Libra. Don't forget that, the sign where the sun in the northern hemisphere enters into the underworld of the year. So there is a beauty that can only come through the hardness of Saturn. And it takes a certain kind of fortitude to see that and appreciate it. And I think we can all relate with that. It's the same kind of thing that you get when you really, really, really love something. Like, I think, what song lyric really embodies it? Remember the song Summer of '69? Was it by Bryan Adams? I can't remember who it was by. I think it was by Bryan Adams. And he said, I got my first real 6 string. I played it till my fingers bled. Right there it is. So, and you love something so much, but it breaks you down, and as it breaks you down, it builds you up. That's how calluses work when you play guitar. I've been playing guitar since I was 14. I'm not any good at it, but I love it. And there's calluses in life that build up, and on the outside, they could look at as hard and ugly. But if you've been the one building those calluses through time and pain and commitment, you know what deep appreciation there is. All right, what deep appreciation there is for the grooves of love, on the record tracks of our hearts. So that's Venus Saturn. That's the positive of Venus Saturn. But of course, it goes with it the heartache and sometimes the termination of different kinds of relationships. So we're also looking at things regarding women. Venus Saturn can be the death of women, the death of famous women. You can see that with Venus Pluto. We've seen some instances of that. There was someone that died just yesterday and people were mentioning it. I didn't know who she was, but She passed, and that was just as Venus was separating from Pluto. A Venus Saturn can bring that too. Now, Venus Uranus. Venus Uranus, on the other hand, is did you guys ever see the show the Rocky Horror Picture Show? You guys know that movie? It's a crazy. First of all, I had no idea when I remember I was in grad school and there was a watching party that someone was having, and it was like a coordinated flash mob. You know those things where people just suddenly show up in the mall and there's like 30 of them and they're all of a sudden, just dancing like mad to a Michael Jackson song. And you see this, I've seen videos of people doing this. I've never actually seen one in person. And I'm always like, first of all, that's just really cool. That's amazing. Way to disrupt the commons with a blast of beauty, I think that's cool. But this Rocky Horror Picture Show was kind of like that before I even knew what flash mobs were. And I was just lost. First of all, I was lost. And I was like, I think you guys are all cuckoo. And I was like, I kept going to the bathroom. I kept going to the bathroom and hiding out because I was like, these guys are all nuts. I was like, so, and I mean, it was kind of like fun, but I also just didn't feel like I knew what was going on. And they were all saying things. And I mean, it was crazy. So some of you guys know what I'm talking about if you know the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But at any rate, that's the Rocky Horror Picture Show is very Venus Uranus. It's eccentric beauty. It's perverse, but it's beautiful. It's kind of twisted and weird, but zany and fun and attractive and like that, right? So you get Venus and Uranus together and it's like, get your freak on. You know what I mean? Get your Rocky Horror Picture Show on. Just it's flamboyant, sparkly, bizarre beauty. That's one dimension of Venus Uranus. Now, the other thing with Venus Uranus is, of course, going to be experimentation and love. Sorry. I was thinking, I always have clients like, and it's like, I've had so many of these that I have to just laugh because it truly is like, it's a stereotype that I don't mean, I don't mean to pick on, but it's true. Okay. So like late August, early September, just after Burning Man is done, a couple of clients will just show up and they'll be deeply confused because they had some kind of polyamorous, polyamorous desert adventure at Burning Man, and they're wondering very seriously whether this can be maintained or not. And I'm always like, it's really hard for me because I'm sitting there being like, that's crazy. What are you guys doing? Put your pants on. Put the crazy costumes away. My like Saturn, my Saturnine Capricorn moon is like, you silly pantses. You just stop doing that crazy stuff. But I realize that's kind of a judgy, conservative, like overly conservative. So I'm like, I'm really trying hard not to be like, no, your polyamorous relationship is not going to work. It's just going to lead to fun times and eventually pain. But okay, so I try to set that aside and really listen. And what I've understood over time to really deeply validate what's going on with that need to sexually experiment outside of any kind of normal like monogamous situation, right, is that sometimes there is only a way that you can discover aspects of yourself, your character in life, sort of psychological exploration that can only happen when you sort of get to move freely within different kinds of intimacy and different kinds of physical or sexual or energetic exchanges. It's not for me. Like, I'm just not so into that. And I'm making light of this today, and I hope you all understand it's in good spirit, that's often what's at work behind Venus Uranus dynamics. So the Venus Uranus images in my head that have no business being there. So Venus Uranus dynamics are like that, where there's this need to be the trickster, the experimenter, the rebel in relation to sex, love, art, beauty, eroticism. And again, even though maybe that archetype is not very active in my life, I honor and respect that we're all here to learn about different things. And so truly hope that my humor is taken in the right way. Now, the Venus-Uranus dynamic can also be about the way that relationships need to be rekindled with the spark of love or passion. I'm bored, right? I'm bored. Have you ever felt that way in a relationship of any kind? It could be sexual, it could be a friendship. It's like the relationship needs something new. And I remember moments like this when I was, in high school. It seemed like they were happening every other day. You'd find yourself, at least I would, sitting in my basement with my friend being like, what the heck should we do? Like, we've done all the things, man. We've watched the movies. We've gone for bike rides. We've played basketball outside. We like whatever. We've done all the stuff. And then there would be like some crackpot idea, you know, you know, some some, and especially when I was like a lot younger, it'd be like, what what if we went and pooped on old man Witherstone's doorstep, right? Something totally inappropriate, totally profane. You know what I mean? Like, what if we did something that was out of bounds? You know what I mean? And maybe even desecrating something holier. What if we broke into the school, man, and just stole a bunch of erasers or something like that? How could we sort of do something that's fun and joyful and probably harmless, but maybe desecrating of something sacred or beautiful? You get that kind of trickster, rebellious energy. I've gone off the rails today, guys. I'm sorry. Venus-Uranus dynamic can be like that. And Venus-Uranus is also like, you'll see relationships that just need that stimulation, that reconnection, that reawakening of passion. And that often happens under a Venus-Uranus dynamic, as does, I always remember we had a Venus-Uranus dynamic earlier in the fall. And I was talking to my wife, and I were having a long conversation about whether or not to have a third child. And we basically already had decided not to, but it kind of came back up again. And then we were talking about how, like, no, our freedom and the need for us to like make sure that our relationship is connected, that kind of overrode the idea of having a third kid. And I know for some people it's like, it's a totally different choice for every different couple and so forth. But that happened under a Venus-Uranus dynamic. So questions about freedom and individuality in love, in relationships, sexuality, things like that will come up. Now, when you compare the Venus-Saturn with the Venus-Uranus, that's why you have such a weird and profound dynamic toward the beginning of the month, because both of those impulses, the more conservative, long-suffering, love me little but love me long, says Venus-Saturn. Whereas, Venus-Uranus is like, yeah, but can we go to the Rocky Horror Show party and just, get all crazy while Acyuta hides in the bathroom? So anyway, all right. So that's the dynamic at the beginning of the month that I wanted to talk about. The next thing in the month that comes is this really incredible new moon in Aquarius energy. Look at this. Look at Aquarius just going for it this month. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets on the new moon. This is happening on, let's see here, the 11th. Yeah, the 11th. February 11th, we have a new moon while Mercury is retrograde in Aquarius, while Venus and Jupiter are conjoined in Aquarius, and while Saturn is in Aquarius, and all of them are in the whole sign square with Mars and Uranus and Taurus. So what to say about this? Frankly, I think that you're going to get more out of listening to my monthly horoscopes when it comes to this particular transit, because this one is really going to be, it's like a bomb going off in whatever whole sign house of Aquarius lands in your birth chart. So it's going to be easier in some ways to sort of interpret this new moon, because it's so much Aquarius energy, by virtue of looking at, okay, where is the seed being planted? The start of a new cycle. The start of a new cycle, the fruits will manifest in time, but a seed is being planted and it's landing somewhere in your birth chart. Look at the whole sign house of Aquarius. This is an auspicious new moon with Venus conjoined Jupiter. The two benefics exactly together means that, okay, so there's a laboring quality. There's a progressive futuring quality. There's the hard work of Saturn, in the background. This is all happening in Saturn's sign of Aquarius. We're going to build something. It's going to take a long time. You've got that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on the winter solstice of 2020. Now you've got this massive new moon. But the benefics conjoined at that exact same time, that's huge. There's some really like auspicious connections that are going to be made in that house, wherever it lands in your birth chart. beneficial influences coming in with this new moon, planting a new seed. There's also a revisionary impulse. It's not just something new, it's something new, but something you're changing. And that, like for me, that's landing in my career house. We will be, during this time, we will be working on and probably announcing my new course, which will be starting in the fall of 2021. It'll be adding a fourth to my series of courses. I've always had this dream of having, 4 years worth of astrological study that someone could do as if you're going to a college, right? You get a 4-year degree. So I've finally created the fourth program of my training programs, and we'll be producing it, probably launching it, sometime during this period. Well, that's landing in my 10th house of career, right? So it syncs up very and I'm not timing any of this out deliberately. It just so happens. But that's the kind of thing that you're going to build something, but there might be a revision to existing things happening simultaneously. And you're also seeing this really beneficial support coming in from Venus and Jupiter. Now, again, there's going to be this push-pull between Saturn and Uranus happening, which is part of the story. And that could provide for, there's a little bit of grit to grind up against here, but I'll talk about that next. Okay, so finally, the last transit of the month that I see is really pivotal for this month. Later February to me is not that exciting compared to everything up to this point, which is why I'm laboring it so much. So then on the 17th, you're going to see Saturn square to Uranus. Now that Saturn-Uranus square is the first of our Saturn-Uranus squares. You're going to get another one in June that we're going to talk about, and then another one at the end of the year. So what do you get with Saturn-Uranus? Well, this is the one much more than the dynamics in January, which were really intense, by the way, weren't they? Wow, right? Storming of the Capitol, transition of power, some very, at least here in the US, the headlines that I saw were, the big stock market change that happened with the Reddit, whatever people. And that was all very interesting. All of that, by the way, is very Saturn Uranus, but that's and Jupiter Uranus too, by the way. But the Saturn Uranus dynamic of challenges, rebellious challenges to existing structures, or trying to break the rules or limitations, or even, and I've talked about this a bunch, but that idea of existing structures and Uranus being the one that suddenly breaks them up and removes and says, I want freedom, or I want, very sudden, dynamic, rapid change. When those two press together, that's when you get things like earthquakes. That's when you get, energy, like sudden kind of whirlwind releases of energy that threaten or challenge established structures. That can be in nature, or it can be in civilization, or it can be within the psyche, or it can be at work or in your relationships. But you've got a real grudge match in February between Saturn and Uranus. Now, they can work together in interesting ways too. For example, Saturn's insistence upon the grounded, sober, confining, disciplined, like that. And Uranus, the need for rebellion, can give you principled, unrelenting, rebellious activities. There can be the desire, like, I don't care if it's different. I don't care if it stands out. I don't care if people like it or not. There's a lot of I don't care energy in the air in February. I just don't care what you think, right? Why? Because there's principled, rigid, there's principled, rigid energy with Saturn, and there's this kind of, avant-garde, maverick, rebellious, and innovative energy with Uranus. So watch how those two come together. You're also going to see, just, you could say that there's sort of principled rebellious energy, or you could say that there's rebellion versus more conservative or traditional qualities. And please, let's be really real here. We love to glorify the rebellious energies, like, no one's telling me what to do. I don't answer to anybody. I'm the sovereign one. I have all the power. It's my rights. It's my will. It's my choices. It's my reality. I create the future, So that the emphasis that we place on that, understandably, some of that comes from not wanting to be governed by, systems of thought that are restrictive or oppressive. And so we can sympathize with that. But then on the other hand, the there's nothing, in some ways, there's nothing worse than someone who doesn't realize that unconsciously they are just as rigid about being a nonconformist as the traditionalist is about being traditional. So there's an irony there that we always have to be aware of within ourselves. There's a season for all things. There's a season for tradition. There's a season for rebellion. There's a season for commitment, and there's a season for liberation from constraints. These two energies are mixing it up this month. So that's what we're going to be looking at. I will be breaking this down in individual horoscopes on Monday. This transit is perfecting over the month, so you could feel this energy now all the way through the end of February and all this year, but peak periods in February, June, and then at the end of the year, it's in December. So we will be watching what happens and breaking it down together, giving advice for how to deal with it, maybe a few times to contemplate the deeper spiritual tension that these two energies represent on a philosophical level, because there's a lot to explore there spiritually when we look at how these energies can help or hinder our growth as spiritual beings. We'll be doing that in the month of February as well. So that's where we're heading. I hope that this was a helpful video for you guys today. Gives you some things to look forward to for the month of February. I would love to hear from you guys in terms of if you were born with Venus, Saturn, or Venus, Uranus, or any connections between Venus, Saturn, and Uranus. How have you dealt with those paradoxical energies? How else would you describe Venus, Uranus, or Venus, Saturn? What kinds of lessons have you learned about those things? Always love reading what you guys have to write about your own experiences with those energies. Anything that I missed that you feel like is important to add about these energies? It's always nice to hear people's commentaries in the chat box too. Like, what else is there to know or learn about Venus, Uranus, or Venus, Saturn, or Saturn, Uranus? So feel free to create a little conversation in the chat box. All right, that's what I've got for you guys. I hope that you have a great weekend and a great month of February. Horoscopes will be out over the weekend or on Monday. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye.